Hi, folks. You ever notice Democrats treat politics like a bad group project? Lots of yelling, no accountability, and somehow you still end up paying for it. Take LA Mayor Karen Bass, for example. The city can't even keep the streets clean, but she found the time to make a statement by refusing to lower flags for Charlie Kirk. Priorities, am I right? And then there's the Emmys. Yes, apparently those still exist for some reason, where Hannah Einbinder thought she was making history by yelling, "Go Birds, F Ice, and Free Palestine." Stunning and brave, right? More like stunningly predictable. Let's roll the clip.
Finally, I'll pay the difference. Sorry. Finally, I just want to say, finally, go Birds, and Free Palestine. Thank you.
You know, I am so glad we're living in a cultural moment where absolutely nobody of influence, intelligence, or common sense actually takes seriously what these weirdo theater kids think about politics. And the proof is right in front of us. Kamala Harris spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to buy the endorsements of this celebrity class in the last election. The so-called cultural tastemakers who were celebrated less and less every year. And it didn't matter. She still lost. That's the evidence the mask has fallen. Nobody cares what these people say or think or stand for anymore because everybody knows that they don't know anything. They're not smart. They're not insightful. Their only skill is memorizing lines, saying them with great emotion, and trying their best not to look into the camera while wearing a designer outfit of some sort. Sure, there's an art form to acting, but being good at pretending to be somebody else doesn't mean the rest of us have to pretend you have something meaningful or even factual to say, okay? Screaming bumper sticker slogans that amount to Democrat propaganda doesn't make you right. It doesn't make you courageous, and it doesn't give you a substantive argument. And there's no greater example of that than what happened when Hannah Einbinder was asked later why she said what she said, because her answer showed exactly what happens when empty performance collides with real questions.
Hannah, I wanted to ask you, when you were up on stage, you talked about Palestine, and I know you signed a pledge too. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah. So, well, I thought it was important to talk about Palestine because it's an issue that's very dear to my heart. I have friends in Gaza who are working as frontline workers, as doctors right now, in the north of Gaza, to provide care for pregnant women and for school children, to create schools in the refugee camps. And it's an issue that's really close to my heart. For many reasons, I feel like it is my obligation as a Jewish person to distinguish Jews from the state of Israel, because our religion and our culture is such an important and long-standing basically like institution that is really separate to this sort of ethno-nationalist state. And in terms of the pledge, it's like many movements, boycotting is an effective tool to create pressure on the powers that be to meet the moment, you know. So the Film Workers for Palestine boycott does not boycott individuals. It only boycotts institutions that are directly complicit in the genocide. So, yeah, it's important to me, and I think it's an important measure, and so I was happy to be a part of it.
Now, let's address the obvious, because it's probably one of the first things most people noticed. Why is her top half blurred? Well, folks, that's because this footage is straight from Palestinian media. And in that world, you can't show shoulders. That's the cultural standard. And right there, you see the great hypocrisy of the Democrat Party. They posture as champions of women's rights, equality, and liberation, but then they align themselves with societies that literally deny women the status of full human beings, basically. That's not a fringe observation. It's the core contradiction of this entire performance. And let's be clear, pointing out that contradiction isn't the same as justifying a war or ignoring the suffering of civilians that are getting caught up in this conflict. It's saying that you can't claim moral high ground while propping up movements or governments that would strip you of every freedom you enjoy. Hannah sits there in a designer dress reading what looks like a prepped script from activist groups who either paid her, pressured her, or at least emotionally manipulated her into thinking this is her obligation. Yet the very people she's defending would see her outfit as criminal, her voice as illegitimate, and her identity as purely expendable. This is the deeper rot in our cultural discourse. We've trained a generation of actors, influencers, so-called allies to confuse activism with performance. And because performance doesn't require consistency, only applause, the contradictions don't matter. You can rail against the patriarchy in America, then go and champion a cause led by actual patriarchal systems abroad that would literally kill you if they had the opportunity, and no one in Hollywood will call you out on it. That's how we got here, folks. Our institutions, from universities to entertainment to legacy media, have elevated identity politics and ideological purity over reason, absolutely. No context or basic self-preservation at this point. Now, to take it a step further, Hannah's entire statement collapses under even minimal scrutiny. She claims to be standing up for Palestine because she has friends who are supposedly building schools and treating children in Gaza, yet the reality is that Gaza has received billions in international aid consistently diverted by Hamas into tunnels, rockets, and weapons rather than schools or hospitals. She insists on distinguishing Jews from Israel as though Israel is some alien entity, when in fact it is the world's only Jewish state, established as a refuge after centuries of persecution and supported by the overwhelming majority of Jews worldwide. She parrots the rhetoric of ethno-nationalism while ignoring that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East with Arab citizens serving in parliament, the judiciary, and the military. Rights Palestinian women can't even dream of under Hamas rule. And her talk of boycotts being an effective tool deliberately mirrors the BDS movement, which is not about policy disagreements, but about delegitimizing Israel's very existence. In short, what she offered wasn't moral clarity or factual insight. It was a repackaged activist script, stripped of context, completely detached from reality, and blind to the authoritarian systems she is unwittingly, or perhaps wittingly, defending. And speaking of retards, here we are in the retarded section of the video where Jasmine Crockett obviously has to make an entrance.
But as somebody who understands history,
Whoa, what?
when I see ICE, I see slave patrols.
What?
Now, I never lived through the slave patrol period.
So
but
how
if
do
you
you
know
see
the
that?
history of policing in this country, then you understand that they were born out of slave patrols.
So Jasmine Crockett just managed to undermine herself while trying to make a point, and in doing so, she revealed she has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. This has to be one of the most asinine and frankly inflammatory claims we've ever heard, equating ICE to slave patrol. Think about that, folks. When you brand a federal law enforcement agency as the modern equivalent of slavery, you aren't engaging in historical analysis. You're manufacturing a moral justification for violence. It's the same rhetorical trick as calling every Republican a fascist. If people actually believe ICE agents are slave patrols standing against their basic human rights, the logical next step is to attack them. There's no other outcome. And the irony is thick because not so long ago, Crockett demanded someone show her where Democrats were inciting violence. Well, here it is, Jasmine. Another example in a long list that's too long to count. This is how the Democrats sustain their narrative power, folks. Through bad history, rewriting of history, reckless comparisons, just straight up false equivalences, and rhetoric designed to delegitimize institutions, inflame emotions, and normalize aggression against anyone who enforces law and order. And that dynamic is playing itself all over the Democrat apparatus, from academia to the media. Here we have this video from the LA Times from this so-called extremist expert who had this to say about Charlie Kirk's assassination.
The American left are not the only ones that have called Charlie Kirk fascist, even within the more far-right fringe, even more further right than Charlie
Really?
Kirk. For these types of people, he's not far-right enough, especially when he's doing things like defending Israel. We're talking about people who are, anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ.
This has to be one of the most bizarre conspiracy theories floating around since Charlie Kirk was assassinated. The idea that someone on the right would be responsible, or that the so-called far right was calling him a fascist. Democrats are trying to spin this narrative by pointing to the years-long feud between Nick Fuentes and his Groyper fan base and Charlie Kirk and Turning Point. And yes, that feud was very real, but all the actual evidence points to the assassin being a leftist. His family, friends, former classmates, and coworkers have all said the same thing. While he grew up in a Republican household with a father who was a pastor and veteran, he was radicalized later in school, in college, and online, especially on Reddit. He was openly critical of Charlie in the days leading up to the shooting, telling people how much he hated him. He was also dating a trans partner, and it was during a speech on trans violence that he pulled the trigger. That's not a coincidence. But this is what Democrats do, folks. They inflame the rhetoric to a point where violence becomes inevitable, and then they turn around and gaslight the entire country by pretending they had nothing to do with it. Instead, they fabricate alternative narratives, even going as far as to doctor documents and circulate fake images to make it look like the shooter was a Trump donor or a MAGA supporter. We've seen the Photoshop Trump t-shirts, the edited memes, the cheap propaganda designed to muddy the waters. They even tried to spin a Halloween costume he wore in high school, one of those parody writing on Trump outfits, as proof of support when the joke was obviously mocking Trump as short and orange. The dishonesty is breathtaking at this point. And the idea that people on the right are calling other people on the right fascists is just not how this works. Nobody in their right mind actually believes that. This is clear and pure narrative construction, plain and simple, and it shows how far the Democrats are willing to go, not just to cover their tracks, but to project their own violence onto the people they most want to silence. Now, all that being said, no matter how hard Democrats and the left have tried to stop this movement, Charlie's martyrdom has only awakened more and more people, so much so that countless around the world have gathered in his honor, from South Korea to England to cities across America, even in deep blue California. The outpouring has been undeniable, with hundreds coming together in Beverly Hills. I was there, while thousands filled the streets of Huntington Beach for one of the largest vigils yet. The sheer size of these vigils, with candles lit, flowers laid, prayers being made, shows this was not only a moment of mourning, but a powerful display of unity and defiance, an affirmation that Charlie's legacy of unapologetic conservatism, Christian faith, freedom of speech, and youth activism will never be erased, no matter the hostility or tragedy. And that, in fact, as a result of this tragedy, his message is now reaching tens of millions that perhaps he hadn't reached before. But, as always, not everybody is happy about Americans coming together and celebrating the life of a patriotic American. Our mayor, Ellie, one of those people being LA Mayor Karen, who is having an absolute meltdown.
Flag is lowered during a time of mourning, distress, and respect.
All over social media, people have been expressing their support. There's also been outrage over President Trump's order to lower U.S. flags to half-staff through Sunday night to honor Charlie Kirk.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
Celebrating something.
You don't put the flags across the country half-mast for this guy? I'm sorry. Mourn for him. Feel bad for him. Feel bad for his family. Don't put flags half-mast. Come on.
While the president's order applies only to federal buildings, on Friday, this memo went out to all LA City fire stations, instructing personnel to fly the flags at full staff and not lower them unless directed by the mayor.
Wow.
Inside sources told us many stations defied the directive.
Good.
And we can confirm it. Several stations have been flying the American flag at half-staff.
Good.
One firefighter who asked us to protect his identity issued the following statement. As a 25-plus-year LAFD veteran, I am disgusted with the lack of humanity and loss of basic morality LA leadership has shown. The core beliefs of all LAFD members are service to the people, regardless of who, where, when, how, and why. This notice is an insult to what LAFD boots on the ground do.
We don't have someone who is a first responder or a soldier or a federal official or even local official, an elected official. We have a influencer.
USC law professor Jody Armour argues that Charlie Kirk does not meet the criteria for lowering the American flag. He also points out that while most people think what happened to Kirk is horrific, the things he said and did in his life make it difficult for some to mourn his loss.
He made a lot of very negative statements about lots of socially marginalized groups who are now being asked to celebrate that life that was dedicated to vilifying them.
Once again, LA Mayor Karen is proving she has nothing better to do than to act like a petty, vindictive politician. And honestly, The name Karen has never been more fitting. This woman is disgusting, deplorable, despicable, one of the worst leaders Los Angeles has ever had. And let's not forget, folks, I like to always bring this up because we have to know this. She was literally trained by the Cuban government in her early years, part of a long history of communist activism designed to undermine America from within. That's the lens you have to use to understand every move she makes. She is not here to represent the people of Los Angeles. She has never once spoken up for the working class citizens who suffer every day under her failed policy. She doesn't care about working families. She doesn't care about you. Instead, her focus has always been on illegal immigrants and on advancing ideological agendas that destabilize, divide, and weaken our institutions. That's why she ordered city fire stations not to lower the flag for Charlie Kirk, a petty act of defiance against a movement she despises. Even as many firefighters themselves defied her directive out of basic decency. So don't ever mistake Mayor Karen for a leader who actually cares about you. She's shown time and time again that she doesn't. She hates you, and she will never hesitate to make that crystal clear. And so the question that remains isn't just about corrupt mayors, dishonest experts, or shallow celebrities. It's about us. How long will we allow those who despise our values to define the culture we live in? How many times will we accept propaganda dressed up as compassion or weakness masquerading as morality before we call it for what it is? These moments force you to decide whether you'll be a passive consumer of narratives designed to manipulate or an active participant in reclaiming the truth. Because in the end, the real battle isn't only on the streets, in the media, or in politics. It's in whether you have the courage to see through the lies, to reject the scripts handed to you, and to stand firmly on what you know is right. So ask yourself, are you willing to challenge the story, even when it costs you something? Or will you let the story be written for you? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.